Hi, welcome to the Sports Psychology Podcast. I'm Dr. Patrick Cohn. I'm here with Georgia Miller, one of our mental performance coaches at Peak Performance Sports. Today we're going to start a new series. It's called our 3-Way series. And in today's video, we're going to talk about 3 ways to use imagery. You're listening to the Sports Psychology Podcast. Georgia, thanks for joining me today. What's the challenge for athletes about using imagery? What are they missing out on?
Several things. I receive a lot of feedback from my athletes that, it's too hard, so they don't necessarily know how to use imagery. It takes too long. So a lot of athletes think they need to sit down for 20 minutes every single day and be in this meditative state to use imagery. So the biggest challenges I'm seeing is that they don't know how to use it, and they don't know that you can modify it to work with your routines and your timeline and your schedule.
Yeah, but when I was an athlete in high school, I used imagery almost instinctively and automatically. As a football player, I would just visualize and see my role in the play. So I think it's very natural for athletes to use this mental imagery. What are we doing beyond that natural ability that athletes have? How are we modifying it for them to make it work for them?
Well, that's a good point. First of all, we're pointing out that most athletes actually already use imagery in just a very informal way, whether they're just sitting in the classroom or in their car on the way to the game and just visualizing good plays. That is a form of imagery. So what we're doing is giving them some more formal tips to enhance their imagery, but also simplifying it for them. So giving them tools to, okay, how can I incorporate this into my pregame routine? And how can I use this through different challenges and prepare for different things, which is what we're going to talk about today, is 3 different ways that athletes can actually use imagery. And some of these, they might already do instinctively.
I don't buy into the notion, though, that it's too hard for athletes, because as a golfer, I can just go ahead and I can see my shot. I can see the shot that I want to hit. I can see the target, see the trajectory of the shot, which we call like a shot tracer in the golf world. So there could be snapshots of using imagery. It doesn't have to be a super formal half an hour program, right?
Right. Yeah. And a lot of them think that it does need to be like that 20, 30 minutes where they're just sitting down. But also there are some aspects of imagery that are hard for athletes, like the first person perspective versus third person perspective. So for most people, it's really easy to view themselves from that outside perspective and see themselves performing the skill. But for a lot of them, it's really hard to look out from their own eyes and see themselves doing the skill. And so just like any other skill, they need to practice it to get good at. And so that's kind of what we're teaching with our athletes is, hey, this is a skill that you need to learn, just like all the other technique and mechanics that you have learned in your sport. You got to practice it.
So one of the ways we know that imagery helps is from a confidence perspective. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And imagery, it's not just a good athletic enhancement tool. It's a life skill. I mean, being able to see yourself do successful, awesome, amazing things, I think that's really important just in life in general. So if you're imagining yourself executing plays, getting the outcome that you want, seeing yourself do something that maybe you aren't great at yet, or you're in the process of learning, that's naturally going to build your confidence. The more that you see yourself being able to execute something, the better you're going to feel about it and the more belief you're going to have in your ability to do it.
What would that look like? You said see yourself. Is it a first person perspective? Is it a third person perspective? I mean, there's many different perspectives that athletes can take, right?
Yeah. A little bit of both, but research shows that the first person perspective is going to be the best just because you can also incorporate those other senses into it. So what are you feeling in that moment? What does it look like from your peripheral? Who's there? Like, what are you wearing? So first person perspective helps make it everything just a lot more realistic for you. And when it's more realistic, you can easily apply it. But also it's good to use the third person perspective too and just kind of see, hey, what do I want to look like from other people's eyes?
Great. Yeah. I always encourage my athletes to take that first person perspective. For example, if it's a tennis player, then you actually want them to think about the feelings they want in addition to the visual images, because some athletes are more visual oriented, some athletes are more kinesthetic oriented. but typically a combination of both. So you would want them to not only feel it, their performance, but you also want them to see it from their own eyes as well. And it can be used for many purposes, right? For example, in tennis, it could be used for tactics on how you want to play the match.
Strategy.
It could be used for stroke correction as well, maybe between changeovers or something. There's lots of different uses. But another use I know you talk about is for injury rehab or recovering from injury.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of athletes don't know that. So when I'm working with an athlete who is injured, it's a very useful tool because they can't get their physical reps in. So we're saying, well, let's get your mental reps in. And maybe we're visualizing the swelling going down in your knee. Maybe we're visualizing, hey, how do I want to come back when I am cleared and released? Am I going to come back confident? Am I going to come back a little bit scared and hesitating? We want you to be able to see yourself jump right back into your sport and play with confidence. So helping them feel productive in that way, knowing that they're doing everything they possibly can be doing through their injury, just helps them feel better about coming back and progressing back into their sport. So it's a really useful tool for athletes who are injured.
Yeah, and I think the research says you can do your mental reps. Like mental rehearsal alone is better than nothing. Like obviously when you can't practice, you want to do something. And when you're doing mental imagery or mental rehearsal and you're doing your reps that way, it shows that you're actually priming the neural pathways and working on that motor memory of the skill.
Oh yeah, and there's been so many research studies. One of the more famous ones is the basketball one they did, where they had 3 groups and they were testing out free throws. They had one group of guys sit out for a week, not touch a basketball and just visualize their free throws. The other group play like normal, and then the other group, the third one, they were just shooting free throws. And after a week, the group that progressed the most was the group that just visualized, which is pretty cool. So it's a great tool for athletes that the same neurons are firing whether you're physically doing it or mentally rehearsing it. So it's actually like you're getting some mental reps, but without the physical exertion of it.
So what's the third way?
Third way, so we have gaining confidence, helping yourself through an injury, and then also to prepare for events. And let's take, for example, like a basketball player, right? So we aren't telling you to imagine yourself missing shots, but we're helping you prepare for adversities and how you're going to respond to those. So it's helpful. Maybe you're putting yourself in a situation where maybe there's a bad call, or maybe you're a quarterback and there's 2 minutes left on the clock and you have 1 drive left to tie the game. How are you going to look, feel, and act in that moment? How do you want to respond in that moment? That way, it's like you've already been through that scenario in your mind multiple times. You don't have to take a second to really think or question about what you're going to do in that moment. You know exactly what you want to do when that moment arises.
Yeah, let's take that one step further. What about for coping? Like if that player misses a shot, we could use mental imagery for the coping and practicing your coping skills, which we talk quite a bit about in the MGCP certification program.
Yes, and the composure is a big one. So if I'm working with an athlete who is having a hard time staying composed on the field or on the court, especially after mistakes, well, then being able to see themselves stay composed if they turn the ball over or something is just going to make it a lot easier for them to actually do that in a game-like situation. So imagining yourself moving on from mistakes, imagining yourself in a high-pressure situation, and mentally how you want to be handling that, it helps decrease the stress when that adversity does hit you in a real-life scenario.
Excellent. This is a great discussion about mental imagery, which I think is very useful for athletes. If you want more information about mental performance coaching with Georgia or myself or any one of our mental coaches at Peak Performance Sports, visit us at peaksports.com. And you can also check out more articles and videos and podcasts at our blog at peaksports.com as well. All right, Georgia, thanks.